How's it going, everyone? Welcome to my video. I hope you all are doing well. Today, we are going to go into round 3 of the tournament that I played last week. Well, depending on when the video gets uploaded, it was played on Saturday, December 13th, I believe? Yeah, Saturday, December 13th. So, we are into round 3. If you missed the first two recaps, I would definitely go check them out. But I am 2-0 so far versus two 1500 level players. And in round 3, I'm facing a tougher opponent, that being Daryl West, who is rated 1744, and very solid player, can be very kind of creative and interesting to play against and things like that. So I'm excited about this game. I have the black pieces, and in this position, my opponent goes e4, and I decide to go c5 once again. It's my second Sicilian out of two possible opportunities with black, and quite simply, I just wanted to have some more fun games. I've been playing e5 for most of my recent competitive chess career, and I really like it, but I've been trying to mix it up a little bit, and I like these Sicilian lines where after knight f3 I go e6, going for a Taimanov. After d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, queen c7. The idea behind queen c7 being that I'm kind of like hitting the e5 point, so there's no like e5 move, and later down the line I can go knight f6 and bishop b4. That's kind of the fundamental idea behind queen c7. If white were to rush by playing a move like knight b5, attacking the queen, I just go queen b8, and I think there's a line that goes, is it bishop e3, a6, is it this knight d4? No, it's something else. I'm not entirely sure, but I think, what is the line? I think it's like a4? No, bishop e3, a6. There's some line where, like, white gets some like knight b6 or like something like that. But anyway, neither here nor there. There's some lines. But anyway, my opponent plays bishop e2, and eventually I play a6 to stop knight b5. My opponent castles. I play knight f6. My opponent plays bishop e3, so we kind of transpose into a mainline setup against this. And here I go bishop b4. This is very thematic to go knight f6 and bishop b4 because I'm targeting the e-pawn and also putting pressure on the knight, which also could be pressure by the queen in some instances if my knight were to move. And in this position, my opponent played bishop f3, not really the best move. It allows me to play knight e5, which is not what I did. We'll kind of go into that here in a second. This is actually a pretty theoretically relevant position to where my opponent here is actually supposed to go knight a4. And knight a4 just has the idea to take on c6, and you're honing in on the b6 square. So um, the most common move here for black is to play bishop e7, just kind of retreating the bishop. I think also knight a4 opened up some c3 ideas. So retreating the bishop is pretty natural, and then my opponent could have taken and then play knight b6. You're attacking the rook and also the bishop, and then you get the bishop pair in this position. Kind of went down the line a little bit just what the top recommendations were, and it's a solid position. Black has a solid pawn structure in the center. You have the open b file to work with, but on the other hand, white has the bishop pair and some activity. So just one of those, and then when I do kind of like study a little bit more openings in the coming weeks and months, this will be pretty interesting to look at this knight a4 maneuver, because I'm sure stronger players know about this. But here my opponent played bishop f3, and I seriously consider knight e5. Obviously, when the bishop goes to f3 and the e5 square is just open, that's kind of one of the first things I think about is like, what if I put my knight on e5? Because kind of like what I talked about earlier, from white's perspective, I want to get the bishop pair if possible. It's an open enough position to where if I can snap the bishop off for the knight, then it's going to be pretty good for me. So I play knight e5, and let's just say my opponent plays, well, that's another discussion, is that I'm attacking c3. My opponent goes bishop d2, and then I take. My opponent plays knight takes f3, and then let's just say that I castle. Then I have the bishop pair now. I have the bishop on b4 and c8. I can play d5 to open things up. There might even be b5. And it's a good enough position to kind of play. And once again, having the bishop pair here is going to be very helpful. So after bishop f3, I opted out of knight e5. I don't necessarily remember the concrete reason, but I think I remember seeing that after knight e5, there's a move like bishop f4. Then after knight takes, queen takes, I wasn't exactly sure what I'm doing here. I think there was something about e5 to where my opponent could have played. I'm not exactly sure. Actually, I saw this. I think I actually saw this and thought that e5 was good, but apparently there's knight f5, and with I take, E5 is really good for white. Okay, there's no way I would have seen that. I think the reason I didn't go for this was I just saw bishop f4 and that kind of scared me a little bit. Um, well, no, it wouldn't have been that because I would have seen e5. I'm not exactly sure. I think honestly I was playing a little bit too patiently, which in chess it is good to like take your time on things. It is good to kind of like, just like not rush things. If there's a move that looks really good, just kind of wait to move for it. The problem is it's just a little bit too slow because when I castle, my opponent has the opportunity to snap on c6. um he has the opportunity to snap on c6, and again he has some of the remaining ideas of like playing knight a4 and honing in on the b6 square. So really, so you do have to like balance out sometimes where you don't want to rush, but also if there's an opportunity with minimal consequences, like I play knight e5, and like what am I really what are my consequences, right? Now I do think the line is bishop f4, and that is something worthy to consider. And I'm not supposed to take on f3 then play e5. That's just too risky. But like there's only this pin. There's really nothing to be said here. I can just castle or even play d6 if I'm more comfortable with that, just breaking the pin. And I'm doing all right here. So anyway, after castle, my opponent takes on c6 and doesn't play knight a4. He doesn't find this idea to go knight a4, then put the knight on b6 and ultimately get the bishop pair. My opponent here plays knight e2, which has a common with knight a4, that is, to put the pawn on c3 and kind of attack my bishop. But it's just a little bit less active on e2. I suppose he's trying to go to f4, like hop into f4, maybe enable some bishop f4, but the knight would have been a little bit better on a4, kind of fulfilling its purpose to go to b6 and then try to go after my bishop pair. So after knight e2, I play d5 in this position. It is very thematic. If you watch my round 2 recap, you'll kind of, see me go on about the importance of pawn breaks. And d5 is a very thematic pawn break. And if we go kind of get back a little bit, that's part of the idea behind playing this whole knight f6, bishop b4 idea, is not just to pressure e4, but also I'm putting pressure on the knight, and eventually I want to break in the center with d5. So it is fulfilled a few moves later. I finally get my d5 break. And if you're wondering again, well, what's so important about pawn breaks? Well, they kind of help you sort of just activate your pieces. Either you take and, you're going to recapture some way, or you're going to be able to take. You put pressure in the center that way and kind of force things. In some positions, obviously not here, but sometimes you can even push the pawn up, and then it can be very effective. So after d5, my opponent took. I mean, I think that's the only logical move, because otherwise I am threatening to take the pawn on e4. Maybe there's even a threat to go like e5 and then d4. I'm not entirely sure, but my main threat is just to take the pawn on e4. My opponent took, and then this is actually a very critical position, and I would actually encourage the audience to pause the video. Which way would you recapture? Would you do it with the e pawn, the c pawn, the knight, or none of the above? Maybe it's just a random move that is the best move. So black to play while I take a sip of my my fluids. All right. So if you said e takes d5 to open up the bishop, you're actually incorrect. That's what I did. That was my thought process during the game. I thought, okay, I'm just going to play e takes, I'm going to open up the bishop, and it's going to be all good. We'll go into the nuances here in a second, but as it turns out, the best move is actually c takes on d5, which seems a little bit ludicrous. You're like, well, why would you just recapture and just like kind of block in your bishop? I think again, this kind of goes into the topic of patience, to where it's like, you don't need the instant gratification of opening up your bishop. It actually has more consequences than it has benefits, and I'll talk about that here. And basically, that'll kind of help us understand why c takes is a little bit more solid. Keyword solid. So after e takes on d5, my opponent plays bishop f4, which is not necessarily the best move, but it's all right. And then after bishop d6, my opponent trades, then goes c4, which I think is a really good move. Actually, I'll put an exclamation point. And the reason why my earlier decision of e takes d5 is not that good is white is putting pressure in the center, and I am going to be saddled with an isolated pawn. And we see this a few moves later. I'll go into the details of these moves later, but basically, we get a position where I have an isolated pawn, and my opponent can kind of like hone in on it. So what I was supposed to do after e takes d5 is actually go c takes. And c takes is going to be more solid because once again, I am like if my opponent ever goes c4, I don't really have to do anything. I could just maybe put a bishop on b7, and if he takes, I don't have to isolate my pawn. But I think another key idea that I missed is that I was kind of a little bit short-sighted when I took on d5 with the e pawn, opening up the bishop immediately. Because after c takes, like e5, just next move literally is an idea. Like even literally, if my opponent goes bishop f4, I can just go e5, and I have a good center. I do get to open my bishop, so it's kind of a good lesson in just sort of like you don't need to go for the instant gratification, especially if you can look literally one move ahead and realize, oh, after c takes, I can get e5 anyway. And then, like, not only is my bishop open, but my pawns are rolling. There's ideas of d4, maybe e4, depending on which one is better. Most likely d4, because I think after e5, d4, it leaves some less squares open. But anyway, all that to say, I get the two pawns in the center, and as we teach fundamentally, getting the two pawns, let's just say my opponent plays like, rook c1, e5, getting these two pawns in the center can be very powerful. And I open up my bishop and everything like that. So I just thought that was very fascinating, just kind of like just looking one step ahead and just like, rather than on one move, oh, I get my bishop open, think like two moves ahead. Then I'll get my bishop open without having to worry about an isolated pawn. Now, of course, after e5, if my opponent ever goes c4, I have d4. So after e takes d5, I took e takes d5. My opponent played bishop f4. Here I went bishop d6, and here my opponent traded and went c4. So we see once again this idea kind of unfold to where I have the kind of the pawn duo on d5 and c6, but with him playing c4, he's inevitably, if he wants to, going to isolate my pawn on d5. So here I'm just like, okay. So after c4, I play this move bishop g4, which I thought was actually a good move because I'm kind of uh forcing a trade of bishops. And if he were to take, which he did, I have knight takes. Then obviously I have a mate threat, but generally I have pressure as well. I think if he were just to do something else, like the problem is, if he were to play a move like, I don't know, knight d4, it's not really a problem. I could just trade and then like once again, maybe just like play rook e8 or something like that. That could have been fine as well. But after bishop g4, my opponent took. Then after knight takes, went knight g3. Obviously, he's not going to hang mate in 1. And in this position, like, I can just be solid and play a move like, just go knight back to f6, maybe knight e5, rook e8, something like that. But this is, this is the type of move, like, it's not the best. Computer doesn't say it's best, and it does leave some weaknesses, but this is the type of move towards like I kind of want to win this game, and I'll make some weaknesses if it means it gives myself some chances. I knew that f5 is like not necessarily the best move because it does leave behind some weaknesses. Now, if you were to pressure this pawn, it could be attacking my king and things like that. The e5 square is going to be more permanently open, things like that. But I just want to stir up some ideas, to play like f4, f3 in the future. Obviously, it wouldn't be instantly because my knight's hanging, but I want to play f4, f3 in the future. I want maybe lift a rook or maybe like swing my queen, something like that. I just want some counterplay. I did figure that the position was safe enough to where, yes, he does have some pressure, but it's not like I have to immediately like attend to it. So I played f5 because I just wanted it to be a pretty interesting and dynamic game. So after f5, my opponent took on d5, then played queen f3. The idea behind queen f3 is just going to be to put the rook on the d line and attack the pawn. Now, it says queen f3 is a mistake. I think the queen's actually kind of better just like being left where it is on the d file. And computer keeps saying that after queen f3, the next several moves, my best move is just d4. I just go d4, then go rook d1, and just like use my pawn as an asset, which is like it was something that I considered during the game, obviously. I knew during the game that while my pawn is going to be isolated on the d5 square, it could also be an asset, just being that, like, it could, like, push up the board, potentially. Not that I'm necessarily going to queen it, but it just would kind of, like, restrict his pieces to where they have to protect the pawn, and that could be very advantageous for me. I didn't really do that properly, and honestly, when I, like, practice and study on my own time, I'll have to look into how I could have done that more effectively. But I had several chances to play d4, didn't quite do it. I played king h8 because I wanted to just put my king out of line, like in case there's ever an attack on d5 or anything like that. Just wanted my king to be safe. My opponent played rook d1. I played rook d8. My opponent played rook e1. And here, I mean, once again, d4 is the best move. I think d4 and some ideas of like queen b4 and things like that, maybe knight e5 are in the air. But here I played I played knight e5 immediately. And knight e5, my idea is I want to go knight c4 and kind of like poke holes like on the b2 square. And if he plays like b3, I might just go back, and then I have some weaknesses like, after b3, my queen could fly into a3 and things like that. The problem is I overlooked after queen f4 basically how hard it would be to play knight c4. And this is the type of position where I don't think there's not like timestamps or anything, but I definitely feel like I spent like at least 5 or 10 minutes on this position in a 45-minute game. Like my time probably went from like say 20 minutes to 10 minutes, or maybe even like 15 to 6 or something like that. Like I tanked a lot of time here because my original plan, like after queen f4, or my original move, I guess I should say, was to go knight c4. The problem is I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, knight c4, if he trades, I'm just going to take with the rook because I want to keep my knight in c4, but after knight c4, queen takes, I can play knight takes, but after knight takes, I mean, it does hang the pawns. I didn't even really consider that. After rook takes, I'm like, uh-oh, my back rank is weak. He can play knight takes f5 and just win a pawn straight up. And I was like, okay, maybe I can play rook f6, but he plays rook takes d5 anyway. And if I take the knight, then it is mate, right? Well, not technically, but if I take the rook, it's mate. So basically, he would be able to win not one but two pawns, and it would be pretty losing. I mean, I could like take here, but like I'm not gonna voluntarily go into this, right? So I'm like staring at this, and I'm like, knight c4 is just like not playable. That's the move I originally wanted to play, and otherwise, like he's attacking my knight, he's also attacking this. So I'm like, I just gotta do something. So I just played knight g6 in this position. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna play knight g6. I'm gonna suffer in the end game where not only do I have an isolated pawn, but I have a pawn on f5. Well, not technically isolated. It takes effort to defend it. And also, if I were to defend it, it kind of leaves behind some weaknesses. So I went into this knowing it's a worse endgame for me. I'm just like, okay, we're not gonna do anything fancy. I'm not gonna try to like, justify my reasoning for playing like knight e5 by going knight c4 anyway, even though I knew it's bad. I'm just gonna go knight g6 and just buckle up. I mean, if I lose, I lose, and if I get a draw, that's good because I know I'm worse. I'm not just saying it because of the eval. I know I'm doing worse here, but we're just gonna buckle up. And here, my opponent plays knight f1, which it's not a horrible move, but I was quite encouraged to see it because it kind of allows me to like. Now I know he's trying to reroute his knight, probably go like here or maybe like something like that. But I'm just like, okay, I can breathe a little bit. I think his best move was I don't remember what I thought about during the game, but like knight e2 to like d4 something like that makes a lot of sense. Because I have this isolated pawn, it is a good idea to kind of like plant your knight on the square that's like in front of it. So it prevents me from pushing it, but also I don't have a pawn that can challenge it. That can challenge the knight, that is, because it's isolated, so the pawns adjacent to it don't exist, right? So my opponent plays knight f1, which I think is a little bit misguided. Not bad, but it's a little bit. I play f4. The idea behind f4 is I want to eventually maybe go f3, but more importantly, when I was playing the game, was like I just prevent knight e3. I prevent knight e3 from happening, and he goes f3. Then, in this position, I realize I have a little bit of life after f3. I thought f3 was a mistake. Now, granted, I don't know what his best move necessarily was. I think maybe like knight d2 would have been a better move to kind of like hone in on f3. Maybe he can play like rook d4 and try like put pressure. Because I'm not really like threatening f3. I mean, I don't think. Like, if he played rook d4 and I went f3, he just goes g3. and then slowly but surely he can just kind of like round up and get my pawn. So I know I mentioned f3 as an idea, but I'm not like immediately threatening it. So he plays f3. Like he doesn't like have to do this. Like he doesn't have to do anything about my f3 like threat. And the other thing about this is that now there's a little bit of vulnerability after the move knight h4. So there are multiple ideas here. One is that, you know, the knight on h4, it's not going to be there permanently, obviously, but there are opportunities for me to swing it to like f5 and maybe go into like e3 or d4 if the opportunities arise. It could help assist my pawn by occupying the e3 square, but I'd say more pressing is that I have a threat. Like, my opponent does nothing. I have a threat to play rook g6. And rook g6 has a dual idea to go rook takes g2 or knight takes g2, I guess, depending on which one I prefer. Probably, you know, even though rook takes g2 is more instant gratification, knight takes would probably be better, actually, because of the discovery. But also, I have a threat of knight takes f3 because of the pin. So if my opponent goes like rook e2 or something like that, to avoid the fork, I have knight takes f3, and then I could go like knight g5 or something. Now, I guess it's saying that like the pawn is attacked, so rook g6 would be abandoning the pawn. I kind of just realized that, but I think the pressure makes it worth it. We kind of trade pawns. I trade my isolate pawn out, and it would definitely give me some activity. So anyway, after knight h4, I have ideas to swing my rook. Maybe I could place my other rook on d8 first and then go to g6. There are ideas, definitely. My opponent played knight d2, and here I played knight f5. And my idea is quite simply to go to the e3 square, so my opponent just went back to f1. I considered repeating once and just kind of seeing what he does, but I didn't really see need to do that, so I just played rook fd8. In this type of tournament with a like delay, repeating doesn't really like do any good because you don't gain time necessarily. I guess it's good to see like if your opponent messes up or whatever, but since there's no increment, I didn't really see a point. So I just decided to just put as much protection as I could on the pawn, and then, you know, just eventually, as I said earlier, just use it as an asset. So after rook fd8, my opponent played rook to e5, putting pressure on the knight. I just played g6 because I don't really see a need to move my knight. Well, one, there's not really anywhere good to move it, but also I just want to keep it on the f5 square. I played g6. My opponent played g4, trying to force my knight to move, but I just captured en passant. Then after pawn takes, I decide, well, my best chance to win is going to be to play like king g7 and just get the king out. And I meant to mention this earlier, like actually a few moves ago, which is that we went from, let's say here, I'm groveling for a draw, but literally a few moves later, after, like, literally 2 moves later, after knight h4, in my brain, I'm like, I'm playing for a win. So it is kind of interesting how that all works out, right? So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because here, like, I have the pass pawn that I can use. I have the knight that could hop into like e3 if it's like supported. I thought I was doing pretty good here. This knight's kind of restricted because even if it goes to d2, it's restricted by my pawn. Now, if I move it, that's a different story. But if I deem moving it to have been the best move, that might be a good situation. So anyway, after g6, my opponent played g4, and then I went king g7. The idea to go king f6. Then my opponent went f4, which does allow the, well, actually, I don't know what I'm saying here. But anyway, I went d4, so finally just kind of pushing it. And my threat, once again, is to go knight e3. Or that's my idea, I guess I should say. If my opponent does nothing, I go knight e3. And if my opponent were to take the knight, then I would take back. And there is a attack on the rook. So after d4, my opponent played knight d2. The idea is for him to go knight e4, so I do need to make sure that I'm seeing the threat. So I go rook c6, not only sidestepping the threat, but also I might have my own idea to go like rook c2 with either a pin, or maybe I'm forking the knight or stuff like that. As you can see, it's an equal position, but it's very dynamically equal because we both have a lot of stuff going on in this position. Like, he has like knight e4 ideas, I have knight e3 and like rook c2, and like there's a lot going on. So here, my opponent played g4 in this position, which is okay, but I think my opponent maybe kind of underestimated the power of like knight e3, kind of like attacking the rook and the pawn as well. I think it would have been better if my opponent had just like played a move like he plays like knight e4, king f7, and then maybe just go like king f3. That's what the computer's saying. Just kind of sidesteps a lot of things with knight e3. Like, I could put my knight on e3. Well, actually, not apparently, because he has check. And after... Oh, he has check? And he can take. And then I blunder my rook. Wow. So wherever I go, he just take on e3. Wow, I didn't even realize that. That would have been like a shot from the dark if he had just gone king f3 and I went knight e3. Wow. Well, it's always good to kind of blunder check these moves, but after g4, I play knight e3, which attacks the rook but also attacks the pawn. And it's quite an interesting position because if he goes knight e4 check, I kind of have a decision where to put my king, and it can kind of go either way. I think on king g7, I would have been worried about some rook e7 stuff, but it is important to note that after rook e7, particularly, then I have king f8. I'm attacking both rooks. If I go king f7, there might be knight g5 after king g8. There's some lines where now he has to protect the pawn, so he goes rook g1. But then after I check, he goes king f3. I think this actually shows up in a later variation where yeah, this is actually after king g7, rook g1. Like, it looks like I can check him, but after king f3, I have nothing. And then if I take the pawn, then he has rook e7 check, king f8. Because of king g8, of course, there's knight f6. And if I were to hide, there's mate. So after king f8, he could just play move like rook takes h7, and even though I'm kind of like able to snack on pawns here, it just doesn't matter after he plays a move like rook b1. And then he's kind of coming in, and then with the power of the knights. So all that to say, knight e4 check could have been very interesting because he goes knight e4 and then rook g1. Then like I just don't have anything, right? I can't push the pawn because the king takes, right? If I go check, he just hides on f3. And it looks really good for me, but he would just kind of be able to hold on. That's still a struggle, right? But after 93, my opponent forgot. He saw this and plays king f3. And then after king f3, I just snap take the rook. And in this position, I'm just completely winning. It was just kind of an oversight from my opponent. I think he thought for a little bit and thought that, like, my main threat was knight takes g4 and play king f3 to kind of protect it, which was a good move, but it would have been good later after knight e4 check. Then after king f3, he just hangs a rook. And just like that, I'm completely winning. Now, it does take technique. He doesn't resign immediately because he goes knight e4 check, and then rook e7, then it's like, okay, he drives my king to the back rank, so I do have to, like, play with some technique here. He goes g5, I take on b2, because then I'm like, okay, well, the way I'm going to win is I'm going to push my pawn anyway, and then at some point I'm going to have to move my knight, right? Then he goes knight f6. I thought he would try to go, like, knight f2 to try to go knight g4, then knight h6. But I guess as it turns out, it's a little bit too slow. Because after check, I can just go king f8. Yeah, and then I queen. But, I mean, he goes knight f6 immediately, which I just snap take. And the pawn is never going to do anything because my king is just within sight to protect it. And then this pawn is going to be running with my knight controlling the queening square. So, yeah, in this position, my opponent resigned. There's not really much he can do. If he goes I don't know if he resigned, actually. Maybe I just stopped noting moves. If he goes like rook g7, sorry, my move here, I play d3. Yeah, the king cannot stop the pawn because I just push anyway. If he goes rook g7, I just go king f8. And I'm eyeing the pawn, and there's just really not much he can do. So, with that said, we moved on in this tournament to 3 out of 3, going to a very critical final round to where I can actually win the tournament if I draw or win. But even if I lose, I kind of secured a good tournament, which I will go into that here a little bit later, because that can actually be dangerous, making it a very, like a conservative route. I guess content is what I'm trying to say, but like, just kind of talking about this game, I thought was pretty interesting because I think I talked about, just throughout this whole tournament, I thought I was a little bit rusty. Like, I made some decisions that weren't necessarily best. Like, here I should have played C takes and been more solid. I played E takes. Here knight e5, I'm like kind of struggling after queen f4. But I was just able to kind of like, not only grovel my way out of it, but just get a position to where I think I can win. Then it got a little bit complicated, but at the end of the day, my opponent was the one to make the blunder and not me, so I was pretty happy about that. Well, thank you all so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed the recap. If you want more recaps like these and more videos, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. We just hit 225, I believe, so we really appreciate it, or I really appreciate it. And I will see you all for the next video on round 4, and you will see then how I finished the tournament. But until then, stay tuned and peace.